Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some are brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes and hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We stand on the ancestral lands of the Makacha and Scattered people. We pay respect to their elders past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events, to use such truths to guide the legacy of this Arts Commission. I want to welcome you all to the DC Commission for Arts and Humanities. It's a wonderful gallery. Let's put our hands together for the art gallery. I would like to first say that we're here, and I want to give some honor and recognition to the chair of the commission who's present with us today, Mr. Reggie Lee. And we do also have one other of our commissioners here, our secretary, treasurer, secretary of the commission, Julianne Benson. Please give us a round. And if any of you are preparing to see some wonderful French theater, you might see a familiar face, right? We also want to pay respect to one of our jurors here, Fabiola. Are you ready? Mr. Fabiola, jurors. And so now to start our respects, my honors, and my remarks in earnest. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this exciting and interesting panel discussion, Capturing the Moment, Artists in Conversation. With this conversation focusing on the current exhibition in our gallery, Legacy, Civil Rights in 60, I would be totally remiss if I did not inform you that throughout history, artists have been a catalyst for social change. Art is one of the most powerful tools in our arsenal in the fight for social justice. That is because in every fight, there's a story to be told. The artists you will hear from today have shared their lived experiences, fought for global change, and communicated their stories through their crafts. Anne Bowie, Karen Ruckman, Connor Zorza, Amara Hutchins, and Karen Baker all have art in the exhibition you see in the gallery today. It is my hope they will explain today how and when they were inspired to create the amazing works of art that they have on display here. I would love to learn whether their inspiration was a means to challenge the norms, or was it there to amplify a voice, or to shape a better future for us all. Also, I really must thank our Public Arts Department for such a forward-thinking and remarkable exhibition. Let's give them a hand if we could. Thank you, Lauren, Michelle, Deidre, Carrie, Ron, Jenna, Vanessa, for all of the hard work you put into not only this exhibition, but all of the works many of us see across the district. And in case you did not know this, when you go into any district government agency, you see the art on the wall. Our team here has not only placed it there, but documented it, found it, and ensured that it was promoted, and that when our politicians are making certain policy decisions, they may be inspired by something on that wall, which is a very important thing, I believe. And I want to recognize, again, my thanks to our moderator, Dr. LaCharles Ward, the museum curator, a photography and film director of the Earl W. and Amanda Stafford Center for African American Media Arts at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, Brenda Moss. Give him some love. Now, prior to joining the Smithsonian, Dr. Ward was on faculty at the University of Pennsylvania. He received his PhD from Northwestern University, where he was trained as a scholar of Black visual culture with particular focus on photography, film, media, art, and law. So you can't get over him. All right, he's here for it. He is currently working on 2 book projects working on the following broad question: how do we view and engage visual works produced by Black people as not simply objects to be looked at, but as works produced in a robust discourse, conceptual framework for thinking about Black life in the U.S. and globally? So, Dr. Ward, we want to say welcome to you, and we're extremely happy that you have chosen to come to the commission and participate in this event. At this time, I'll now turn things over to Dr. Ward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Aaron, for the lovely introduction. Thank you to the DC Commission for the invitation to moderate, and in particular, thank you to Michelle and Deirdre for kind of nurturing me and guiding me through the process. I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to have you. And it's also great to be amongst amazing artists and panelists that I've gotten a sense of their work over time. And so, recognizing that time is of essence, I want to sort of move into some introductions. I'm going to read all introductions at once and then move into discussion. So first we have Anne Louie, who's sitting to my left. Anne is a mixed media, and we can hold applause to after introductions of everyone. Is a mixed media artist and sculptor who, through her work, studies different pre-conversions in antique cultures and cosmologies. Her work has been shown across DC's gallery landscape and collected by the Commission's Art Bank and many other local collectors. She has 2 pieces in this exhibition: She Rises and The Code, 4 points, and is a member of the Black Artists of DC. Connor Zora is an artist, educator, and activist currently based in Washington, DC. Born in Rochester, New York, they received their BFA in Ceramics and Gender Studies from the Maryland Institute College of Art, or MICA, in 2019. Zora's work explores the relationship between imperial ceramics, cultural taste, and socio-political power structures in the United States. Zora's art has been shown and awarded internationally, including features in the Times Best Photojournalism of 2020 and the New York Times. Currently, they teach and work as a creative director at the District Clay Center. Their work, Trenton Bay's Uprising, is featured in this exhibition to your left, my right. Emir Hutchins is an autodidact artist based in Washington, D.C., who works primarily in collage and printmaking. Emir's portraits combine vintage Black magazines, hate mail, and other historical documents, as well as found objects, tissue paper, and new materials. He imagines that people themselves are collages, which is a kind of amazing kind of statement to think about. Amalgams of countless disparate fragments and inputs. He, quote, remixes his subjects in new and often, quote, Afro-pacist, end quote, ways, but always drawn from or challenging a historical notion. Amar's contributed 2 pieces to the exhibition, including What to American Slave is Your 4th of July and Re-elect Chisholm, 76. Karen Ruckman, at the far end, is an image maker whose work encompasses documentary film, photography, and civic engagement. Working with communities across DC and northern New Mexico, she has developed photography retreats and workshops for at-risk children, women experiencing homelessness, and justice-involved DC residents. Her documentary, In Lorton's Dark Room, tells the story of men who take control of their prison narrative through photography. Her current project, Where I Do My Time, follows the hopes and struggles of the formerly incarcerated as they navigate the lethal intersection between race and the carceral system. Karen contributed 4 photographs to the exhibition, including Martin Luther King Family, Ben Chavez Speaks, Stop the American Handgun War, and University of the District of Columbia Support and King Holiday. And finally, but of course not least, we have Karen, who is also one of the jurors this year, but is also an incredible ethnographic fiber artist, documentarian, She uses natural and organic fibers and materials to design ethnically handcrafted textiles, accessories, and rugs. Through her research on different processes of enslaved African American weavers before the Great Migration, Karen utilizes those techniques in her artwork. She is currently completing a documentary on the history and narratives of African American weavers of that time as a Doctor of Design candidate at the North Carolina State University. She is also, interestingly, I thought, harvesting indigo, brown, and green cotton to use in her work and providing access to this dye and fibers for other marginalized fiber artists for free. Karen has received an art exhibition grant in 2018 from the DC Arts Commission for Anacostia Unmapped. Please join me and applaud these amazing panelists and artists. And so, always obvious of the ways in which words move us. And the question that we are asked at the inception of the exhibition is how, why, where, and with whom do we gather? And in that spirit, I think we should all kind of think of that question. But in that spirit, I want to pose the question to the panelists and for each of you to take some time to answer the following question. First, introduce yourselves to myself and also to the audience. But more importantly, share a bit about your particular approach to using art as a tool for civic action. And then what do you believe is the role of artists and social movements? And the reason why I preface that question with how and why and where we gather is because we're all gathered here today, right? And we all are gathered entering the conversation through different mediums, through different histories, through different genders, through different sexual orientations, through different age class demographics. We're all entering regionally, and so it will be interesting to hear each of you in turn answer that question. Of course, as a moderator, I'll ask to keep those remarks as brief as you can, right? Of course, I know that the spirit moves, but being mindful that we are on time here. So I will start with you, Anne.
Okay, hi everyone. Anne Bowie here. Please excuse my voice. I am in the second week of recovering from whatever's going around DC. And I'm very grateful to be here. I appreciate the commission, staff, obviously the jurors, and all of you for being here this evening. Our new executive director and new commissioners, and my path has been one of a combination of a yellow brick road and Sorrow's Kitchen, and both of those paths. I believe my approach to making art comes after a life of, not after, but flowing from a life of working in urban schools and working with teachers and students and parents in urban schools. I was a consultant in urban schools for 20 years, mostly dead in the inner city. And my story is one of serendipity and synchronicity, because I landed at Stanford because my professor in sociology told me, you don't know what you want to do, fill this application out. And he was right, I didn't. And that led to my path to Northern California. All of this is relevant, and it feeds into my approach to using art as a tool for civic action. While there, I picked up a degree in history and focused on African American history. I was fortunate to study with Clay Carson and Cannell Jackson, and learned quite a bit. So I see art as a tool, looking at it through history. And I believe that my focus is on resistance during enslavement, resistance to enslavement during the antebellum America. And I focus on that window because it is the foundation and basis of the source of the images that are held in this society to this day. Very potent images, very potent myths that harm everyone and everybody bites it. There's no way not to, it's in the air. And so civic action for me means delving into the hard parts that we don't want to deal with. Enslavement brings up for many European Americans, shame and guilt and I don't want to talk about it. It brings up in African Americans shame and sadness and embarrassment, and I don't want to talk about it. Some Black Americans want to go directly to Africa and not deal with 400 years of culture and resistance on this side of the water. I focus on both sides of the water, but my roots are in Jackson County, Florida. And that's a source of my roots in my emotional and spiritual basis. Jackson County, Florida, my grandpa's farm. And so my approach to civic action is to say that a people with no past, or people with a past that they do not honor, respect, or feel as if they can honor and respect, are doomed to repeat that past, as we see we are doing now, today. And I believe civic action in the African American community is about turning over, psychically and otherwise, what a leading pastor in Atlanta said during the Herschel Walker election. And he was a mega pastor, everybody's seen it and talked about it. And I'm really brief on this. He said that we don't, hey white folk, we don't need, we ain't the same slave talking, shuffling, slave niggas that you all are used to in Georgia. We can walk for ourselves and we can think for ourselves, and we don't need you. And that perception of us historically, if it can be espoused on international television by a prominent member of a prominent community, says that, first of all, he does not know his history, but secondly, his opinion of his ancestors, and probably his great-grandmother, or certainly his great-great-grandmother, who taught his grandmother how to quilt and who taught her how to make sweet potato pies, he's talking about her. And so, I don't like that. And my approach to civic action involves, let's take a step back, as the Sankofa icon says, before we keep moving forward. Let's go back and re-examine who we think we are and what we think we did and what we think we experienced, because there is profound growth and lessons to be learned from that. I'm sorry I took a long time. I won't anymore.
It's okay. Thanks for those remarks, Connor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here. My name is Connor Zora. I use they, them pronouns. Thank you to the commission. Thank you to the jury for allowing us to participate in this conversation and this exhibition together. My work really comes from my background growing up in upstate New York. So it was mentioned, I grew up in the Rochester area, right along Lake Ontario, and I grew up in a traditional sort of conservative family, with Fox News on in the background. To set the scene, the town that I grew up in is about 97% white. So the diversity was really lacking where I grew up. And as growing up in that environment, I grew up having conservative beliefs myself at the time, because that's what you're exposed to. And when I got to college, I went to study in Baltimore, and complete culture shock. It completely changed my worldview, because you're exposed to so many different things. And I realized that a lot of the views that I had had as a child, growing up through middle school, these conservative views were not just expressed to me through direct teachings, through direct verbal action from my parents, right? It's not all explicit. There was a lot of implicit bias that was sort of taught in the objects around me. In particular, I think to these ceramic collections and the decorative arts that my grandparents collected. On my father's side of the family, my grandparents were antique collectors. And so we had all sorts of old European porcelain, American porcelain, stoneware, little figurines, biscuitware, those little sort of tchotchke sculptures that you see around, laying around antique shops. And, I got to thinking, these materials, provide one specific narrative, and that's it. And they were always celebrating, in particular, European Americans, white Americans, and celebrating this certain view of history as this grand, cannot be critiqued, American exceptionalism. And so what my work is about is taking that sort of aesthetic that had been ingrained in me for so much of my life and using it as a way to talk about contemporary social issues in a way that might speak to people who wouldn't have those conversations otherwise. We'll talk about this later as well, but I find that ornament itself it sort of disarms people in a way, because you see a really frilly looking vase or a plate that's got flowers on it or something like that, and you sort of turn off part of your brain because it just looks like this sort of inert object that your grandmother may have collected. And I think that provides me a really interesting window of opportunity to bring up discussions of these different conversations, whether it's about racial justice, whether it is about sexuality and gender, like a lot of my work focuses on. I basically am interested in using that ornament to engage in these conversations. As it relates to artist's role in civic activism, I think back to a quote that I know from Anderson .Paak. He's not the first person who said it, but he said, "Make the revolution irresistible," in one of his songs from Malibu. And I think that is sort of the role of the artist, right? Our job is to take everybody else's narratives and sort of highlight them for everybody else to see, get people engaged in actions, get people excited about working with their community. And I'm excited to talk with our community today.
Hello, everybody. First, I want to say that on behalf of myself and Fab and Malik and Andy, Andrew, we are very proud to have been part of selecting the work that you see here for this particular exhibition. So please give it another round of applause. You know, I always say, you bring 4 artists together, what is going to happen? And we were able to collaborate and really spend time in this work and looking at the work, in addition to having to read the act over again, which I can't remember the last time I read that act, to really understand what we were charged with as jurors, and I think that also goes to the role of an artist in social movement. I think we took that as our role, in being jurors, to make sure that we selected work that was going to represent 64, but also was going to represent 2024, because there were many changes we know that we all have gone through between 2020 and 2023, and we needed to give the space for artists to be able to interpret that as well. Otherwise, we would have been stuck in a particular time period with the work that would have been represented here in this room. So I wanted to say that first. I think, the role of an artist is, we can't do without it. As part of social movements, civic action. I've always said I can't wait until art is viewed as really an industry, that you check the box, but a lot of times if you scroll and scroll, and you're still looking for art to be something that you can choose at any level of an application. So I'm ready for us to really embrace it in that particular way. I think for my work, it has been a journey over the last 3 to 4 years, trying to find artifacts by enslaved African Americans. It took me 4 years. And the ones that I found have been sitting in a museum collection since 1896. And I was the first to see them this past November. So I can't tell you the emotion that went along with that, But again, holding and burying information has been part of this journey. And I see those who were picking cotton, growing indigo as scientists, innovators, agriculturalists. They were not enslaved people, because without them, those things could not have been grown. Without bringing Africans over here from different Caribbean continents and lands, it would not have been grown. So there's been credit and narratives that have been put in place around textile and fiber that I am here to disrupt. Because there is no way that I'm going to continue to let a billion-dollar industry not tell our story, bury our story, and that is part of civic action, that's part of social movement.
Wow. My name is Imar, and I just want to say I'm really honored to be a part of this exhibition. I really enjoy the Arts Commission. I've also been a critic. There's always room for improvement, but I think what we have here is special in DC. And it's one of the reasons that I stay in DC. I lived in New York formerly, and but my art really blossomed. I'm not saying it's because of DC, but it really blossomed when I came here, you know? And so I want to thank the commission, I want to thank the jurors and the staff, because you all do really great work every day. And we kind of can take it for granted if we're not careful. And then, you know, it's really a model for the country. And you all know that too. Listening to you all talk, so much of what you said, and which I'm sure you'll say also resonated with me in so many ways, because I spent a lot of time thinking, I've always been an artist, but I spent a lot of time thinking that there were more important things I could do in the world, you know? And I finally realized that there are not more important things that I can do. This is what I'm supposed to do. And, you know, I looked at all because I had always done it like this, in waves, you know? And when I decided to commit myself like fully to it, is when I realized that every other thing that I was doing, if I didn't do it, it would still happen, you know? But the things that, this piece of art on this wall, if I don't do it, it won't exist in this plane, you know? So I feel like there's things that I need to usher onto this plane of existence while I'm here, and I'm trying to do as much of that as I can. And so this speaks to really the role of the artist. I feel like the artist has one foot in both worlds, you know? They have one foot in the world that everybody knows about. And then they have one foot in this other world that people say, well, what is that? Tell us about what's over there, you know? And for that reason, art can go places that other things can't. But also, for that reason, artists might connect to things that people want to be connected to deep down, but they just don't know how. So we can be that conduit if we're using ourselves correctly, you know? And when you talked about Sankofa, you know, I guess this is part of my approach, you know. So this is a print, but the main work I do is these large collage pieces. You talked about the collage. So when I was working on the big version of Frederick, which is all clippings, old ebonies from the 60s, things like that, and I'm proud to say it's in the Art Bank collection, and it's in the Corrections Center. You know, it's a place that I think the commission must have felt needed. People could have used some brightness, you know? And the point I want to make, and quickly, is that one of my mentors is Haile Gerima, who made Sankofa. And he'd come to visit the studio when I was working on Frederick Douglass specifically. And he looked at it, he said, you know, what you're doing, you're trying to put these people in their proper place. You know, a lot of times they curate our heroes out of existence, you know? And you can say that for anybody. Dr. King, for example, if you actually read what he actually said, it's a lot more than I have a dream, you know? And if you actually read what Frederick Douglass actually said, you know, he wasn't for nonviolence. He was for nonviolence if that could work, but he didn't get free through nonviolence. You know what I'm saying? So, and I tell people here, he ran away from Maryland, not to Maryland, you see? But anyway, we have to recast, or what I'm doing anyway, particularly with my work, is I'm trying to do an inversion. So he's part of this body work called Sacred Cows, where you know how in India and also in some parts of Africa, cows are sacred. So what I did was a thought experiment to say, what if black people were like that here? What if when you walk to a Starbucks, everybody, take this, you know? Or what if when one sat in the middle of the street, the car is just slowly went around, you know? So, you know, so that's why you'll notice he has like horns in his hair, you know? You may notice other things about it that are cow-like, right? So that's all I'll say for now. I'm sorry, please.
Well, I'm also honored to be part of this exhibition. My name is Karen Ruckman. I'm an educator and photographer. And I would like to thank the commissioners who are here today, Aaron Myers, the executive director, and many thanks to the public, our team, Michelle and Deirdre, and of course to Dr. Ward and the panelists. I'm a native Washingtonian and have worked in the community for 40 plus years as a photographer. And I always, living here for so many years, and I always felt an urgency in coming up through the days when there was a lot of activism. There was an optimism that there could be change. I was fortunate to witness many of the landmark gatherings. Photographs inspire us and give us hope in the way that words cannot. And really, particularly the pictures I have here, photography is also about remembering. Collaboration was always part of my activity. I worked with an arts group in the early days and worked with filmmakers who, through the Arts Commission, many things. The Arts Commission had an amazing vision. Back in the 80s, there was a program called Art in Prison, which funded my workshops at DC Jail in Morton. And there were others. The work we were able to do with this kind of support was quite unusual. And through my workshops, I was able to give other people who were disenfranchised, the tools to tell their own stories. So that it wasn't a photographer going in and saying, this is what a certain, a prison or a homeless shelter, etc. But the participants in the workshops took their own pictures and told their own stories. And and thank you to the Commission for funding these kinds of activities. In this exhibition includes the 1981 March to make Martin Luther King's birthday a holiday, which did happen in 1983. And the day was like a family reunion, mostly DC folks, but with some, folks as far away as the West Coast. The speakers, were Stevie Wonder always at these marches said, "Happy birthday." Ben Chavis was recently released from jail and spoke, as did others, including Marion Barry. Signs read, "Jobs, peace, and justice." Sounds familiar. And of course, UDC had a contingent there. In 1983, the March on Washington was a time of reflection and renewed demand for equality. Hundreds of thousands of people were there reminiscing about the First March and the 83 March. Coretta Scott King was regal and surrounded by family and love, as she assured participants that her husband was marching along with everyone that day. When faced with injustice, we gather at our national monuments for community and action. After John Lennon was slain in 1980, grieving residents gathered at the Lincoln Memorial to demand an end to the American handgun war. This impromptu vigil was respectful, honoring this man who had used his fame to fight for equal treatment for all people. So I hope my work supports the importance of collaboration and mutual empathy. The question was the role of social movements.
I also want to recognize, so we can continue thinking about the question. I don't want us to run out of time because we have questions for each of you, and I think you'll have time to also talk a bit more about civic action.
Yes.
I think that's where you're going.
Yes.
So I want to move on to some other questions. So in each of your artworks is positioned in a different kind of section of the show. Imar, your work in the people and icon section, Karen Ruckman in the DC section, Connor in matters and materials over here, and Anne's work is bookmarking the opening and closing future-focused sections. Can you each speak to how you grapple with these topics? So I want to start with Mark first. Why is it important to you to represent and recreate iconic imagery of our leaders? And I want to also just remember that if you can keep them brief, will be really great so that we can get through all of the panelists. I don't want to have to be my former professor and cut people off, but I do have that power as the moderator, okay?
I like how you issued that warning before you hand it off to me. We need these touchstones to sometimes counter narratives, and to even, we don't realize how really miseducated and uneducated we are. Like, I feel cheated, throughout all my years of school, plus college, plus graduate school. Like, I didn't spend one day, well, maybe more months I did, but learning about Toussaint Louverture, so we have all these narratives that are everywhere that are basically unquestioned, but you have to question your assumption. So, for example, with the National Museum, for example, I don't have a major criticism of it, but if I were to say anything, a little bit too much credit is given to abolitionists and Underground Railroad. That's not why slavery ended, Slavery ended because there were people that didn't like being enslaved, the point that you were making earlier about the image that we sometimes perpetrate or continue of, subservient acceptance and so on. And it had probably more to do with the general crisis of legitimacy that was set off by the Haitian Revolution. We could very well be in Haiti right now. The plan was to conquer the United States as well. So we could be sitting here speaking French. So I'm always playing with these alternate dimensions, alternate realities. I'm trying to challenge people to think about things differently. I have a piece that it's in French, but it's a C.L.R. James. You guys ever hear of him? He wrote a book called The Black Jacobins. he wanted to make a movie version of this, and he wanted Toussaint to be played by Paul Robeson. The movie never happened, but there was a play, only for 3 nights in London in the 40s, right? And Robeson did play Toussaint in this play. But I've made a piece that's a poster for the movie from alternate dimension in which the movie happened, you know? And it's in French because they couldn't get it made in Hollywood, they couldn't get it made in London, they had to get it made in France. And so it's, you know, I just bring it up as an example of the kind of mental work that I'm trying to make people do. I'm trying to make people challenge their assumptions. I'm trying to make people, you know, as you kind of mentioned, Connor, that people may turn off a certain part of their brain when they think they're looking at art, which actually is an opening for reprogramming or deprogramming or opening, you know.
I mean, I think, and Karen's next, Karen Ruckman. But what's so interesting, I mean, I speak on behalf of myself and not the Smithsonian here. And I think the point that you make about history, right? And there's a way in which history is trained to tell a story in a narrative, right? History oftentimes rely on facts, but there are oftentimes facts that rely on false facts, right? Things that have been challenged, but that historian has either ignored intentionally or just failed to do the research altogether. And one of the things about art, I think, and as a scholar, you know, of photography and I think art more broadly, is that art begs the question: history for who, by who, and for what? And I also think art, as you said, creates an opening. There's a way in which it allows one to challenge historical conceptions of what is and what isn't history itself, right? And so I think, so here you articulate that as I think really important to kind of, and I think all of you in different ways try to do that. I mean, even you, Karen Baker, with your work around textiles and indigo, right? And thinking about, like, it's pushing back against what we have accepted, understood to be historical. And, you know, there are incredible scholars who are also challenging what we've accepted as the historical narratives. I mean, Michelle Trio has also challenged Silence in the Past as an important work that really forces us to think about the kind of obliteration of certain kinds of histories in order to tell other kinds of histories, right? That would become universalizing. But, so thanks for that.
Let me just say, you mentioned facts, but who's decides the facts? And so, for example, we have Mount Vernon and reenactors and so on. We don't have Nat Turner reenactors, you know? So the unquestioned
facts are subjective. Yeah,
exactly.
That's the other thing. I mean, the law was mentioned, but my research is around evidence, and right. So facts are not this objective thing that's just there to be unquestioned. In fact, it is. Facts are decided by, we think legally, by fact finders. Those are bodies of people, right? But I wanna move to Karen so that as we don't run out of time, because I think everyone has something to say. But I wanna come back to you. What was it like being a photojournalist in DC during such a tumultuous time of civic action? I also want to call attention to what you mark yourself as an image maker, which is also, as a historian of photography, I think traditionally photographers understood themselves to be picture makers, right? And so thinking about the ways in which, you know, the terms in which we use to describe the work that we do are also important. Not to sidetrack you, but I wanted to add that in because I love to just notice words. So, yeah.
Well, I think there is a blur. I feel there is a blur between art and documentation, and my work is part of that blurring. And I just wanted to say one thing about, I just saw a show in Richmond, Dowd Bay Elegy, but he said that he's doing the work. He does what he calls historical photographs, and he wants to provoke a conversation about the past and the present moment. And I think that's so important.
I didn't see you, I was there too.
You were there.
I was there.
Did you go to the talk,
The symposium?
Yeah.
Yeah, not to sidetrack folks,
that was
but
amazing.
sorry. Yes.
That was just so amazing. But I also wanted to mention another photographer, Rudy Roy, whose show When Living is a Protest. I mean, the name of that is just always gets me. But he says he makes those images not to change people, but so that I can keep my humanity. And I think that really, those different approaches to photography kind of shows the range about what motivates people. I was motivated first of all, living in DC, it just felt very important to document what was happening. And we did feel like change was happening. The thing that also drove me as a photographer was doing workshops and giving people outside the mainstream the tool to tell their own stories. And that has been really, really important to me through the years. One story, I worked with a group of women who were at my sister's place, which was a shelter for domestic abuse. And we had a show at Martin Luther King Library because the commission always, at the end of each program, we had an exhibition at some spot. And I'll never forget, because this was in the early 2000s, people would come in to the exhibition space and go, oh, who are these pictures? What are these pictures of? And when I said who they were, women who had been survivors of domestic abuse, people turned around and left. And I'll never forget that. And so it's how we've evolved now, because now we talk about this issue. In the early days of working with incarcerated folks, there was more of a sense of community. People said, oh, I know some, but it's more of a family. And how we think about those groups evolves so that we can come to understand different groups with more compassion.
Thanks for that. So I want to move on to Connor. What does it mean to create objects of ornament? What does it mean to you to take on an honorific approach to memorializing our direct action work? And I just want to point out that if you haven't seen the vase, if you have, just look closely at the detailing of it. I think Connor mentioned something that when I took art history classes, they were obsessed with the European ornamental work and engravings, right? But what you see in Connor's work is a complete subversion of that, and in some ways a complete attempt to sort of to hold on to Black life and this thing that we were sort of taught to kind of erase, right? And often these kinds of objects were the center of sitting rooms, of parlors, right? The space to commune, right? But what we get here is a complete rejection of the type of work that to do. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So ornament to me, as I mentioned before, is something where on the one hand, it both sort of shuts off people's brains. They stop thinking about it because it looks pretty, maybe there's nothing more to it. But it also historically has been used as a tool of conveying authority, right? And so the vase that I've chosen in particular for this form, it's part of a series called the Trenton Vase series. And it references a vase that the United States government commissioned back in 1904 for the World's Fair that was getting held in St. Louis. This was the 100 years since the Louisiana Purchase, and they basically commissioned the Trenton Potteries Company to make this ginormous vase, it's like twice the size of mine, to say what is America and present what the United States was to the world. And as you can imagine, the vase was covered with nationalist kitsch. It had George Washington crossing the Delaware as the image on the front of the vase, imagery of a portrait of Washington with flags shooting out from behind his head and an eagle flying overhead. Just the most kitschy, sort of overtly nationalist things you can think of, right? But that was the US government making state-funded work to try to portray what is our country about to people. And it's the ornament that does that. It's worth noting that at that same World's Fair, the US was enslaving basically Filipino people, bringing them to St. Louis, and they had them on display like zoo animals. So on the one hand, you have this giant vase saying, this is our country, and then an exhibit, quote unquote, over, you have people in captivity like animals. It's disgusting. And so for me, part of the power of ornament, again, is conveying that authority. And what I'm interested in is using that sort of authority so that we can support the voices of people who so often do not get the chance to tell their stories and to share their stories. And in particular in 2020, you know, when the Black Lives Matter protests started after George Floyd's murder, I was taking a look a lot, again, at American history, you know, whose stories do we hear, whose stories do we not? And so often, again, it's the focus on the singular individual, right? Talks, again, like we discussed, this idea that Martin Luther King Jr. individually sort of solved civil rights and everything is fine now, right? That's the way so many history textbooks are written. And as Imar mentioned, like, it's the people who are driving the force that is making change. And so for me, I wanted to celebrate the movements for Black lives, the movements against police brutality that were taking place in DC. And I was very careful about the way that people were portrayed here, right? There was a lot of discussion during the Black Lives Matter protests about ethical photography of protesters. You'll notice on the vase, everybody is photographed from the back. I was very careful to make sure that nobody's face is visible because, again, as we were discussing throughout these protests in this time, we don't want people to have evidence that can be used against them to sort of bust them over into the prison system. Another thing that was really important to me to amplify, right, one of the biggest sort of chants that we heard throughout all of these protests was say their names and recognizing the individuals who were victims, who were murdered by the police officers that we were protesting against. And so if you look at the neck of this vase, there are 230 names. That is 1 year, police killed 230 Black people in the United States. And I wanted to hold a space to recognize all of them. In particular importance to me as well were several names from DC. On the vase you'll see that Deon Kay, who was 18 years old, has his name up there. Karan Hilton Brown was 20 years old, murdered in a police car chase. Devon Harris. And of course, afterwards, we also have Terrence Parker, Antoine Gilmore, George Watson, DeAndre Johnson, Vito Hall, Erica Graham, Lazarus David Wilson, Kevin Hargraves Shirt, and more people continue to get shot. I mean, just last week, 2 weeks ago, there was somebody with a mental health crisis who was shot and killed by police. And so for me, this ornament, this decoration, and this authority, that porcelain, that gold, that these sort of imperial forms convey, I think it's really important that we can use those sort of forms to celebrate people who, you know, are actually the ones making change in our community, and pay respect to those people who have been so negatively impacted by the system.
And I should also say it's also important to know that you point out also the ways in which legal documents write out names, and so there's also an unnamed name on that person. You give life to that which the legal documents have chosen to erase from the record, right?
Exactly.
And
There's several of those out there actually will say either like unknown name or what was really saddening to me is name withheld by police is listed on there on multiple occasions, right? So even in this project of trying to recognize these people who have been killed by our government and our tax dollars, we still can't even recognize just their name to pay basic respect to their lives.
Thank you for that. Ed. Yeah, on to you. Your work is both deeply rooted in the past and also reaching us toward the future. How do you see yourself moving between these two modes of work, that is to be moving from the past to the future, ancestors, predecessors, how do you work through all of that in your work?
There's a Celtic writer and Druid, modern day Druid, and he says that he tells his stories because people need to know where they've been, and they need to know where they are now, and they can't do either if they don't know who they are and where they've been. And that's the same thing to me, the past is, William Faulkner also said, the past isn't dead, it's still present. So the past is not dead. And the notion of progress is very often misconstrued in this society to mean ongoing forward movement. And my work attempts to call people back to remembrancing and confronting and grappling with our past, individually, collective, by gender, by ethnic and racial groups, to grapple with it. Because it struck me when you said that you were from a town with very little diversity. But I would venture to say that that town was extremely diverse. I am sure that there were people there from several different European countries. I'm sure that there were class divisions, and I'm certainly sure there were religious divisions. So, and those might have been even silos, not even conglomerations. So the notion of diversity is often leaves out the fact that your community was very diverse and had all the dynamics in it that any other community has. Not any other community has, but it had the same dynamics of low to high to low, that the hierarchy of European ethnic groups, there is a hierarchy of European ethnic groups, and I'm sure that played out in your town. It had to have. Without the absence of black people, it's like James Baldwin said, somebody's got to be the N-word, because this country needs an N-word. It needs it, it requires it. And so I'm sure there was one in your town, just as there is in America as a whole. And my work, the piece 4 Points, is based on the notion that there had to have been visual cues on the Underground Railroad. That's a duh, right? There had to have been visual cues. And everything in that piece, the botanicals, the fabric, the antique fabric, everything in that piece, the 4 points, the God's eye in the center, is recognized by cosmic Celtic, African, and Native American cultures. Anybody with any knowledge of it would know that that God's eye is speaking to them. The Africans call it the 4 moments of the sun. The Celts call it the 4 cardinal, the 4 moments of the year. And the Native Americans call it the 4 directions. All 3 of those cultures have meanings for those directions, colors for them, and lessons to be learned by them. So anybody in those 3 groups who are all running around would see that and pause if they were thinking, and they would look at the rest of it to see if they could read it or see what it meant. And everything in there has symbolic meaning as well as literal meaning. And one of the things I've stopped doing is, yeah, I put a message in there. There is a message that I intentionally put in there. But what I've stopped doing is telling my message and ask people to read it for themselves. And some of the things that I heard when people read it for themselves have been extremely amazing and powerful. And I want to start recording what people read in those stories, in those pieces. She Rises is a piece of found wood, obviously, and her base is referencing contemporary as well as ancestral figures and meanings around her base. And so that just as all 3 ancestral groups had placed meaning in objects and power in objects and communication with the other side of the veil in objects, all the things around her are emblems and of that, talismans, amulets, things to call forth energy or things to emit energy around her base. The past and the present to me are saying that one of the things that I think is that we as African Americans and that we as a country as a whole do not even conceive of the fact that people in enslavement have a lot to teach us. They have some powerful lessons to teach us if we would simply listen. And rather than dismissing them and feeling ashamed of them and wanting to, we need to learn those lessons. We're in a time and place right now where we really need some of those lessons. And so the past and the present, I'm coming to Charles. The past.
You're getting ready.
Yeah, I know, she's gonna do.
I want to get Karen in before we go.
Oh, he's gonna do, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, finish it, yeah.
No, so the work in the past and the present, I don't see a lot of this connection. And our present is really the second reconstruction of this country. We may not survive this second reconstruction if things keep going. So the past is a present, it's not dead. And I'm happy to be quiet with this microphone down.
Thank you. I know that we're at time, but it's not fair to everyone else has said to speak. So Karen, I know that you worked as a juror for this. And I'd love to hear you speak a bit about this process and what it means to do this work in a DC government-funded gallery space. So what role do you imagine our government-funded arts institution can or should have in shaping civic and public art conversations?
Yeah, this is a full question.
Take what you feel like you can take in the manageable amount of time. I know it's a big question.
Yeah, it's a full question. I think that, when I was reading it, I was like, part of the work, when you talk about artists and government, is to look at the funding as well as the support as social good. A lot of times people confuse social impact and social good. Social good is when you're trying to make sure the larger community is served well. And as an artist, we are the larger community and we should be served well. So the way that, I think the commission is an exception, I really do. And because the support that is given to artists, people don't see all around the country. So that's why I think that looking at art and government has to be viewed as social good. It has to be that they want to impact the artistic community largely. And that means, most times people look at social good as transportation, mobility, the needs that you have in your home, but as artists, we have to be viewed that way. So I think the funding needs to be viewed that way. If you listen to everyone that's on here, there's levels of research that went into their work. A lot of times we're only funding the work, but we're not funding the research, which is a process to get to the work. So that funding needs to also be considered. That's not just a humanities job, right? It's also part of the artist and the process that they take in order to deliver the work, particularly if they're about social movement and civic engagement or civic action as well too. So I think that this is a more of a rare situation, where you have the opportunity to use a gallery. People give you the bandwidth to have choice, but I think that if we start to look at art and government as something from a social good standpoint, then we may see change that moves more so around this country than in spaces and places where you live in the capital, or you live in LA, or you live in places that are, recognized as really cities or urban life. So I think that we need to just really start to view it as social good so that we can impact artists across this United States.
Thank our panelists, and thank you all for hanging out with us. This was a really great set of conversations. I don't know who I turn it over to, but this is the end of the conversation here.
I think that we all have learned a great deal today about what we see all around us. Again, to our moderator and to these panelists, I think I will say everyone we've seen coming to this gallery, they have left enriched because I'm a big believer that every story that's shared with you, you do take it on a bit yourself. These are stories that you can learn from, But this also encourages you to have the boldness to share your story too. I'm not sure how many of you have the opportunity to travel, but I do not take it for granted that these images have been shown and these people still walk free to a degree. These images are shown and we have the freedom to view them in a government space, but also in an open and a free space. That is something that we should not take for granted because many of our fellow artists want so badly to express what they see and they're going through, but they do not have that same freedom to do so. And we are familiar with artists who in times past have expressed what they felt and what they had experienced, even in this great country of ours, and were not given the same level of protection and or freedom. So we live in a very amazing time that these images can be present in a government building without restriction. But we should not rest on our laurels. These stories are telling of moments that we've all experienced, our takeaways, but moreover, it should be pushing us to change the narrative going forward and inspiring us not to accept the status quo or what has happened as being the only way something should be viewed. Our narrative should be pushed in a very great way. These stories should ask us what could happen, what can happen. And I'm grateful to all of you today, grateful to our commissioners, to our chair, to the staff that's here, and those who've been working in front of and behind the camera, those who will view this from home. We do encourage you to tell all of your friends to come and see this work. Come and figure out where they were in some of these moments. Mr. Lewis, I want to say thank you. Some of you, come stand with me if you don't mind, friend. Some of you may not know this gentleman. I've only been here a few years in Washington, D.C., but I can say that in every moment that I have seen a movement happening, this gentleman has been there with his camera and capturing it. And at the age of 86, he is still relevant today. His camera is still on, it's still showing. So I encourage you to please learn about his work. And I'm telling you that I hope to see your work on some of these walls here sometime soon. And I'm praying that we can make this happen. I think we can. You have some people who
It's been
say,
a while since I sold anything to the district, but some of my work is around.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yes, much of your work is great.
Yes.
Yes.
Some of the building.
Yes, but I wanted you to talk about looking back, so that the Sankofa, we can't have this conversation without this particular Sankofa moment. So I encourage you all to speak to the artists, see the art, but please come and visit us once again. Thank you very much, everybody. Am I supposed to introduce Michelle? Are you supposed to come up and say anything? No? Okay, thank you. Everybody's good? Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Let the music play.